We have to have debate that is uncomfortable. We have to be able to talk about subjects that people find distasteful. Where I think political correctness is absolutely appropriate is when we have that debate, our goal should not be to offend, right? Our goal should be to clarify, to enlighten, to help people understand. One of the kind of common things that people are getting agitated about now are issues of pronouns, right? So if a student comes to me and says, my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and the person in front of me presents very masculine, and I think, oh God, I would not have thought you were a she, her. But actually it doesn't hurt me at all. There's no cost to me at all to using the pronouns that this person has asked me to use. If they ask me to use they, them, I will use those pronouns. Political correctness where it's right, it's almost like mehman nawaz. It's hospitality. It's making the person in front of you feel comfortable, making them feel like they belong. And that's really what political correctness for me, where it's right, is that we want everyone in the room to know that they belong there, that they have a place at the table. They're not outsiders. They're not unwelcome. So that's where political correctness is good. Where the political correctness creeps into a kind of a cancel culture. I was a young undergraduate student at one time. I would shout and cancel people. There were people that I didn't like. There are people whose views I think are repugnant and awful. And one of the things you get with time is a realization that they may have bad ideas. That doesn't make them bad people, right? They may have ideas that I disagree with rather than bad ideas. A friend of mine in northern Punjab, again, I keep going back to this place, he asked me, how can Europeans claim to be standing up for women's rights when they have such high divorce rates and they have so many homeless young women and they have so many rapes and they have so many sexual assaults? How can they claim to be standing up for women's rights when they don't protect women like Pakistanis? And in his village, right, divorce rate is very, very low. Domestic abuse is it is a problem, but it's something that within the village they kind of check, and they are guided by Quran and Hadith, right? They use that to guide their kind of women's rights. And I had to say to him, you're taking the worst of the West and comparing it to the best of Pakistan, which is not fair. But the fact is that we don't have a monopoly on goodness anywhere. And that's what's very important to remember, is we all have something to learn from one another, which is why we have to be willing to listen to those awkward, uncomfortable complaints. So when my best friend tells me that women shouldn't be allowed to go out in public without covering themselves, and I say, well, no, I think that's wrong. And he explains to me why. I start to understand, what is he worried about? And in his world, he's worried about his daughter being targeted for sexual assault. He's very worried about that. And given the context of the area that he lives, that's not an unrealistic worry. My daughter goes to school by herself, and I do not worry about that, because in London, she goes to school in London. That isn't a kind of high priority risk for me. I don't have to live in that world where I'm constantly worried about sexual assault. He does. So this is one of the things I think we need to have that conversation about, things like veiling, about arranged marriages, about aspects of religion. We need to have those conversations, not to tell the other person they're right or they're wrong, but to try and understand, what on earth could make you think this thing that I think is crazy? Why would you think that's right? Why would you think that's a justifiable, righteous thing to say or do? I am also an anthropologist. If you know anything about anthropology, which you do, you will know that the vast majority of anthropologists skew left. Most of them skew much further left than me. So when I say my village, I never have a problem with Pakistanis, right? Pakistanis never give me a hard time about that at all. My brothers and sisters in anthropology jump down my throat and say, what, do you own it? Did you buy it? Did you take over? Are you a neo-colonialist, an imperialist? And, okay, they're partly teasing me, but partly they're serious, that they want me to be more mindful of my language. The other day, I was in a seminar and I was talking to a Pakistani, and I said, we are now ready to have the debate about things like female biology. We're now ready to have those debates in public. And what I meant was we in Pakistan. And the person sitting next to me wrote a little note to me and said, what do you mean we? Are you a Pakistani? And I thought, well, actually, I so easily slip into the we when I'm talking about Pakistan, which doesn't seem to bother Pakistanis very much, but it does seem to bother non-Pakistanis.
And it relates to the virtue signaling. right? The moral superiority, just by words, not doing anything, right? It doesn't cost me anything, and I can be morally superior to you.
Well, there is that. Yeah, the social justice warrior. I mean, I'm not going to go down because a lot of the social justice warrior, their motivation is so pure and good, and I don't want to quash it, right? It's like, when a 3-year-old thinks they've cleaned the dishes, you don't want to tell them, sorry, these all have to be washed again. You just praise them and say, wow, good job. So a lot of these kind of 17, 18, 19-year-old Gen Z social justice warriors, I mean, they are the future, right? They will fix the problems, but they don't yet know enough to solve the problem. So I think that's where people like me, we have to mentor, we have to guide, we also have to get out of the way, right? So I have to listen. My daughter and I have an ongoing argument about J.K. Rowling, whether she is transphobic or not. This is clearly a generational divide. She gets furious with me because I kind of understand where J.K. Rowling is coming from. And she is a different generation. So this is, for her, this is a very clear-cut black and white issue. For me, this is a shades of gray issue. And I think the more experience you have with difference, with diversity, with the different kinds of people, the more you realize that, the questions are simply not so simple. Which questions we ask, how we ask them. And we are going to have those debates. You put your finger on it, respect, right? How do we have a difficult conversation about, for example, domestic violence in a way that is respectful? Because there are people who will invoke the Hadith and even the Quran to justify something that other people would say is domestic abuse. Now, how do we bring these people together? How do we help them all understand that we all probably want the same world where people are not abused, where people are not victims of violence, where people do have some control and choice in their lives, regardless of their gender, regardless of their age, regardless of their religion, any of that. We want that. I think most of us want the same world. The tiny number of people who don't want that world, who want to really have a horrible world, well, they're harder to deal with. And political correctness does not address them at all. I am the product of the discipline that I embody. And in that discipline, there is an expectation of a certain amount of political correctness. If it doesn't interfere with the big headline message that I'm trying to say, I will always align myself with the kind of political correct crowd, simply because it doesn't cost me anything. If it makes someone else feel good and I can do it, I'll do it. If it actually interferes with the mission, the AKU mission, the FAS mission, this arts and sciences, liberal arts mission of making the world a better place, then I will always fall on the side of making the world a better place over a kind of a pandering to political correctness.